Well, cool, man. Well, it's great to meet you. I'm looking forward to delving into your very interesting existence as an entrepreneur and an educator and, everything in between. But I want to begin our conversation with 4 years ago, we were wrapping our heads around this pandemic. We were trying to figure out what was going on, how long it was going to last. So my question is, in this post-pandemic era, how did you survive it and how did it change you?
That's a hard-hitting question right off the start. It
Yeah.
changed pretty much the entire trajectory of where my career was going. I was doing a doctorate at the time, and I put it on pause because there's a little bit of an ethical concern when, I'm advocating for you getting molecular testing so you can come to me and then I can tell you all the cool things about it. Get down into the nitty-gritty of what you are. But that's on the basis where that information is yours. That's 100% your information. No one gets to touch it.
Yeah.
If you share with me, great, thanks. But you can only share partially with me, or you can share it all. I'm very simple. I don't share anyone's data outside of just the story that they exist. So if you come to me, Joe, and we find all the interesting aspects, maybe you're the most unique human being, you beat a certain disease, or you reached a certain feat. Well, no one will never know it's Joe. They'll just know this is possible, right? So I act like a center nexus for information. But when we start getting to this era where you have to show some part of your medical history, I'm not comfortable with that because again, I want the business of you coming to me and getting the testing in the first place. It can't be used against you.
Yeah.
And so there are laws in place, like there's the Genetic Discrimination Act, at least in Canada. I know in the States, per state has different versions of it, not the exact same thing, where you can't discriminate someone based off their genetics. So if they have a genetic disease or genetic predisposition, I mean, we can get into genetics a little bit, but the whole point and basis is you can't discriminate against someone based on that. And I started having a lot of individuals come to me during that era to get information and to ask questions what they should do regarding their welfare, their well-being. And so I put the PhD on hold and I simply continued working, and I haven't stopped since. And I do like the academics to a certain regard, but it might not be my place.
Yeah.
I like writing. I can write, but I don't want to force it into a journal either. And it gave me a really pessimistic initially view of what's going on within our scientific communities and business and how business infiltrated science. And the more people I talked to, the more uplifted I got because this isn't new. I was just finally coming to the table of really what's been going on since before I was born,
Yeah.
really. And it's only become so apparent now because things didn't hold together that well during the pandemic. There was the stories kept flip-flopping. If anyone worth their grain of salt as a biologist or immunologist or doctor, right? And no one can deny natural immunity. Every textbook tells you that when you get natural immunity, there's a certain type of composition in your blood. You are now more protected against a wide spectrum of complications.
Yeah.
Whereas if you want to target it, that's fine. It's targeted, but that's limited. It's narrower scope. So, there's this extreme importance that people have access to information. And today we're getting flooded.
Yeah.
And it's very apparent that people they might have passed tests, but they're not able to hold weight and water in the real world.
Yeah.
And that's where I come in. I when you get to sit with someone on a personal level, they know that, hey, I'm here for your best interest, I'm here for your well-being. Then you can check their understanding. You can ask the questions. Okay, well, what does science mean to you? So I'll maybe throw it back to you, Joe. What does science mean to you?
Science to me means it's empirical, it's data that's cross-examined, that's concrete. It's not full of levels of subjectivity. It should be objective, it should be concrete, it should help the public, and it should give us a broader understanding of why we're here and how our biology has expanded for eons.
That's fantastic. I think it's a very common answer to have that empirical aspect within the notion of what science should be or what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm shocked at how the individuals that aren't educated, strictly speaking, in the undergraduates and the graduates and the doctorates, they have a very quick answer, just like you did. And they're usually spot on. You said actually everything perfectly in regards of what science should be. But it's starting to morph and turn into something that I think is akin to people's absence of religion. And they're starting to believe in science. And that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
You don't believe the fact that someone had a data.
Right.
There's someone that did data. That makes no sense.
Yeah.
The only part of belief there is in science, or trust at least, is that someone didn't falsify their information.
Right. Precisely.
And if they did, time will tell, because you won't be able to reproduce it.
Hmm.
Or they did it's really difficult to do a falsified data set that doesn't leave artifacts for a data analyst to be able to find. So science is very simple. It's observe, measure, predict. You see something, it is a burden for the observer. It's not easy. They have to now say it in some way. They have to characterize it into symbols. You take the world as it is, and you have to make it in such a way that another part in the globe, can come to understanding of what you're observing.
Yeah.
And if that aspect of science isn't done well, there's no moving forward. And so this is a very simple way that I work with individuals to help them when they're supposed to see a specialist, when they're supposed to see, other healthcare professionals, or when they're supposed to, do the best they can for themselves, and they're being told a lot of different things. Just ask the simple question. Okay, well, how do you know that? What did you observe? The questions are very simple. They're always the same. The technical aspects you might get lost in. But if
Yeah.
the person can't tell you the very basics to you of what they observed and why they know it, then there's just no moving forward.
Yeah.
Is that the second part of science is the part that no one wants to do, but everyone wants to hear the results. It's the measurements that are, set up in such an experimental design that'll give you some type of evidence.
Yeah.
And there's two ways really about experimental design. Obviously, there's, it's kind of endless in how you can set up your experiments, but really it's either you ask a question and you find the answer, or you go in with a hypothesis. And this idea of a hypothesis is almost like dogma within science. And in some cases, you do need a hypothesis being like, okay, I'm going to say this or this, it's this or it's not, to try and narrow down in a subject. But if you ask a question instead, it'll force your experimental design to be in such a way where you'll capture always information that's useful. Even if it's a negative result where you didn't get anything, at least the way you set it up, you'll be able to bring in information. So this isn't new by any means. This is like critique of the hypothesis. And one of my favorite scientists is David Glass. So he has a very interesting article that goes into this. And many scientists have talked about this, especially within biology, because in systems biology, there's often, you don't need a hypothesis to go in and do the work. If your question is, you know, what is the cell making in terms of proteins? There's no hypothesis there. It's just a question. Now you're going to go out and find methods, and you're going to capture as much as you can. And from that, you can gather tons of different types of maybe narrowed experiments. And maybe a very kind of general one that outside of the biology, it's just if you wanted to know how A interacts with the world. So you'd go, okay, we'll have to set up a experimental design which A interacts from B to Z. And you might find like, oh my goodness, look, A and K are phenomenal. That's a really strong interaction. But if you set it up the hypothesis that A and B might have an interaction, you can make it happen in a lab. I guarantee you, I can make almost anything happen in a lab. I can make one cell turn into another. We've been able to, get down to the molecular aspects of changing a cell in terms of its identity. So this is what scientists do in today's day and age. This is what I saw happening again and again in small scale. But now, as I venture out forward, I'm not the only one with the same sentiment. I've met individuals now that are 50 years, pharma retired, and they're like, yeah, we were just convincing ourselves we knew what we were doing in the laboratories, and chasing red herrings, chasing things that don't exist. And so this part of science is absolutely critical because, if you do a good job, it's there for humanity for the rest of the time.
Yeah.
But if you do a job of business, then you did what you needed to do. You got through and you worked as a scientist for the modern age. And not all scientists are like this, but it means I still rely on people doing quality work so that I can make sense of people's information. But it's critical to have that empirical evidence. That's the second part of science. You have to make measurements, and you always need a control in order to have measurements. And so that's the easiest question that people can ask. What controls did you use to have this? So during our pandemic, did we have controls? Were controls put in place? Like when you went and got a test, did they tell you, yeah, it's not the 2018 version, you got the 2019 version, or it's not the 2018 version, you got the 2020 version? Now, I know for a fact there weren't controls within at least my municipalities. It was
Right.
just here's the new test,
Yep.
and did it say positive or not?
Yeah.
But that aside, that's kind of showcases, was science actually enacted, or was there something else entirely? And then the last part of science is very simple, is you're coming up with a model. All right. It doesn't have to be 100% correct. It usually isn't. It's a provisional explanation of the world around us. And that's what science does. It doesn't prove things. The proving is for mathematics and courtrooms. So within your measurements, you might have a proof, but eventually you have to come up with some type of prediction for science. This is the whole point. And that's the completion to science. You can have just observation, like you're going to go and look at what mushrooms are growing in your forest, what mosses, what plants are growing, and that's enough. And then you get to a point where, like, well, I have evidence, but the moment you gather evidence, it's almost a responsibility for you to put it forward in some type of model. And often when, I would say very astute individuals are talking with today's day and age, and they say the word hypothesis, they almost always mean model, right? They say, oh, this person's hypothesis. It's something they put forward. Like Dwayne, for example, our body, when we eat food, we have a 2 energy system model. It's not a hypothesis. It's a model because we can see that the body really has two, the fat and carbohydrates. Like proteins are there, but you're not supposed to be using them for energy, really, right? On certain circumstances, yes, but negligible. And so, for example, 100 years ago, people studied lactic acid, and so today, can we build off their science of what they left behind? What was the science they left behind? Well, they left blood values that they drew from their participants. So that's the science, the exact concentration. You know where they pulled it from. You know what technique they used. But then their model was, oh, this substance is making them sore. This is what's causing people to fatigue and to gas out. Well, that's wrong. But you see, the value that they put something forward was that it got then to the next steps of saying, well, what is these things that are the determinant factors for fatigue? And so even though their end model was not ideal, it wasn't completely accurate to describing what they had in terms of their small little bits of the physiology, their science was still phenomenal for me to use today. I can pull up their blood values and compare them with our population. I can say, well, the 30-year-old 100 years ago and now you at this age, what's going on, buddy? Like it's either you're going down the wrong track, or hey, you're way better than those guys 100 years ago. What's happened within the last 100 years to really shift, these kind of metrics? And so, this is the completion to science. And I think very few people have this type of repertoire to be able to navigate it with confidence. You get into an arguing match over what is it. And when you see two scientists talking, it's very like fast and deliberate of getting to the next steps of what the work is going to be. And so I think very few people also have the opportunity to see that conversation play out.
Yeah.
Because can people identify who the smart person is in the room anymore? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day. One of the
Yeah.
kids looks up and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Yeah, I translate biology so that everyone can understand it. For all the
Okay.
complexities of health and disease, I help people get to a point where they want to. I get people in touch with their goals. If your goal is performance, I help you get there the easiest way possible. If you have problems with your health, I help you find ways that you can tackle it, because we're not all the same.
Yeah.
Everyone's unique. Everyone has a very particular makeup, even though we have the same physiology. We also have a very unique experience that we've lived our life through. And all that comes into play. So though we have a spectrum of emotions that we can experience, we don't all experience the same emotions. You
Yeah.
know, sometimes we can experience things that aren't even necessarily present in front of us. You see a rope on the ground and you mistake it for a snake.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of snakes. I got no problem with snakes. I'm pretty excited. I might get excited if I like, oh, look, a snake. But another person might be terrified. And
Yeah.
so what happens within the physiology? Well, I help bring that out forward. I help people communicate. And so life is a process. It's not stagnant. And people forget that it is a process. It's in a continual movement. And I get to be an educator. That's really what I do.
So let me ask you this. What did you want to be in the third grade? Was this your dream to become a scientist and get into science?
It was to be a surgeon. That was and yeah, but it was still on the same basis. I wanted to be a surgeon because I was like, well, how does everything work?
Yeah.
You know, when I was a third grader, I would wake up, I kid you not, with what the hell am I? Yeah. You know?
Yeah.
And I found out the only really way to understand myself is to get to know everybody else. And so then I got very curious to what's going on in everyone else's state of being because I was very lucky that I had great mom and dad. My mom, for example, would ask me every single morning what I dreamt. And I thought this was the standard like protocol that parents followed for children, and I would have just outlandish dreams. And I assumed everyone else did. That's just how I thought life played out. And it wasn't until a lot later that I realized, like, well, wait a minute, everyone's going through something very, very different. And I still to this day have under the impression that you can't really ever know yourself. It's pretty much the entire lifetime that you go through. You might figure out, like, okay, I prefer, a banana over an apple. Sure, it's semantics, but you never know how you're going to react when you're put in a scenario.
Yeah.
If someone challenges you or tries to push you to a certain circumstance, how are you going to what principles are you going to uphold? You may think you're going to uphold certain ones, but I think it's going through life realizing that the emotions that we have try to guide us to the person that we want to be. And it's a quite a mystery, I think, still today of really what's the human potential. You know, I've dabbled in, for example, the cold exposure and realized that that's one of the best modalities as a therapeutic, but also to be able to get more life out of you. And the physiology textbooks are lagging behind, right? Like I've gone to the professors, and said, "Can you control your internal temperature? Can you control body temperature?" And they say, "No, that's part of the autonomic nervous system." And I think, like, how can this person have so much confidence to say no when they really haven't examined the world? I'm right here in front of them, able to do it, and they don't want to ask the question.
Yeah.
So you see how certain people have cut themselves off to what's possible in life. And that's okay. Everyone has a different chapter. I'm still, hungry. Hopefully when I'm 80 years old, my mind's still hungry to realize that, what I know then would probably be what I think I know now will probably be less than what I realize of how vast the universe, really is, of how complicated really this human being, this probably the most complicated biotechnology on the planet.
Yeah.
You don't come with a manual, you don't come with instructions.
Yep.
There's no caution, you're thrown into it, and we all know how to do it.
Yeah.
Everyone's doing it marvelously. They think it's not perfect, but I mean, the fact that we can understand each other, we can react to one another, it seems like it's flawless in my books.
Yeah.
So I guess that's really what's been driving me. And I got to a point where I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing in terms of, I guess my contribution to science. It might not be a Nobel Prize. It might not be, a Nature publication or a science publication in the big journals. But the fact that I get to, even help a tiny fraction of the population, is pretty satisfying.
So when did you have your first scientific feat where you thought this is the life that I need to do? This is something instead of being a surgeon or something else. This is the line of work. I feel like this is my calling.
It would probably be when I was in graduate school, and my supervisor said there, it was technical, but you need to figure out these two cells in the liver. I want you. We had a very fancy model where we could light up the liver and of the specifically the stem cells in the liver, at least what we thought were stem cells or acting like stem cells. And I kept coming back with there was at least three, if not four, of these cells. And so me and him we're in a, it's like, who's this student telling the professor, like, hey, I think there's more than two. And he says, no, there's two. And it turns out I was right. I did a good job. I took everything he told me to a very serious sense. And even though he said, like, I didn't know what I was doing, finally at the end, when we did the single cell RNA, sequencing, where you take one cell and then you look at a whole boatload of expression within that cell. And I think RNA is maybe more common term that people understand today, but pretty much you take a look with unbelievable technology. You take a look at a cell and to a very to a particular depth. So you don't see everything, but you see a certain depth that the cell can what it's making it from the DNA. And so there was 4 cell types in there, and I was blown away. I was like, yes, here we go. We got the best evidence possible of today's technology. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't just fumbling around, didn't know what I was doing. And they give me a lot of confidence then to step forward in more aspects. But that would have been the scientific feat. The other feats that I've had, from the younger years was I coached and I personally trained clients. So 15 years ago, I was a personal trainer, and I can get away with saying murder to people, but they love me, and because I would say with a smile on my face, and I got results. People like, oh man, is Daniel training me today? Damn it, I hate it. But they would love it. If I wasn't there, if I wasn't the one training them, like, oh, well, how come Daniel's not here? Where is he? Right. So I think the feats really showcase from what people when they leave me, what they're able to do. This small stuff has been helping people lose weight. That for a lot of people that means the world, but to me it's a very simple thing. It's like the science has been quite clear, and I think it's about like 30 years old now at this point. And so yeah, I think I've run around and made that short story very long.
No, it's good. It's good. So I want to flash forward to today. Of all of the things that you've accomplished and evolved into in your life, what are you the proudest of?
It's a good question. You know, I guess what I'm the proudest of is the databases I've created. So it's database of health. And so when someone comes to me, I have the ability to be as quickly as possible, guide them towards, well, here's what everyone else has showcased as health. And it's my work that I've been able to then use to help people. And I've spent a lot of times going through the literature. And so what do I mean when I say database of health? I've taken, for example, exercise physiology. People have participated in these experiments. They've drawn their blood. Now when someone becomes more fit, where blood markers change. Something as alpha-2 macroglobulin, serum albumin, uh, insulin-like growth factor binding protein, and the list goes on. It's deep. And so I have a quite extensive database because I'm working in this omics field, proteomics, metabolomics. And the amount of information that's out there is incredible, but it's gate kept behind universities and these institutions, not for any real reason other than no one's done the work to find let's say an economical reason to do it. But I've done it more in a sense because this information I find very valuable, and can I now make it understandable for people to also find value in it?
Yeah.
Because if you go to a doctor when you're healthy, he'll tell you, get the hell out of here. Come back to me when there's a problem. It's don't waste my time. There's tons of other people that need help. And so, the exercise physiology field has done wonders to show us what's the difference between being okay and being healthy. So this is the type of databases I refer to. There's also, the aspect of what I find very interesting is stem cell biology. This is what helps us stay vital and healthy. The goal is not aging in particular, but I just want to be 80 years old and still be able to have, sex and do a handstand and walk up a mountain without any problems, wrestle my dog. And it's very much so possible,
Yeah.
right? I think the norm today is to age very poorly, but I don't think, sorry, it might be common, but I don't think that's necessarily the norm. You know,
I
uh,
yeah, I agree, man. I totally agree. So I'm curious, as the man behind the mission here, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
uh, I'm a daydreamer for sure. My head's in the clouds. I'm here mostly with everyone else, and I look the part to be extremely healthy and all aspects. But if I'm not being engaged with, if someone's not talking to me, I'm thinking about, you wouldn't believe it. I would think about a flower and how it cycles and whether that flower can attract other things. Is mutation a real aspect of, genetic drift? I mean, my mind doesn't really stop, and I've actually had to work very hard in order to work with the mind because an overactive organ is a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my mind rambled a lot. It still does to this day. but I've actively sought after techniques, ways in which to be able to bring it to a certain level of calm, which is extremely important for one, the longevity aspect of it, two, for the health, but three, for the mind itself. Is you can get stuck into vicious circles very easily. And the aspect of the mind that's chattering is just a small fraction of the mind.
Yeah.
And that part has been quite a journey of in itself, which started a long time ago, because people want to say ADHD and all these other kind of diagnoses. They can't wait to label you. I mean, here I'm sitting proof. I could easily say I would have all the symptoms and check all the boxes. I'm a very functioning individual, and I've realized that I get to make decisions, right?
Yeah.
The world, if you're under illusion that you don't make the decisions, the world can't wait to fill you with its beliefs
Yeah.
and direction.
Yep.
But you have to take charge and eventually recognize that you're running the show.
So if anyone out there wants to delve into your work, learn more about you, reach out, any of the good business, where do they go?
My company is Timeline Sciences. It's plural time. So the very simple. We have one timeline we're all part of, and science is what you use to describe that timeline.
Yeah.
Right. It's you can debate it if you want to, but the idea is to recognize really what's there in front of you, is to be able to build forward.
Yeah.
Don't waste time proving falsehoods. You can waste an entire lifetime proving falsehoods, and that means you did zero work. You never put enough forward really to get traction. So Timeline Sciences. You can find me through my website. I'm on Twitter a little bit. I've just started the socials. Hopefully people can understand that I am genuinely a science data type of guy. This social aspect of putting it out there, I use help. People help me.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate here, Joe, having the chance to talk and share some insights I think that are important.
Yes, sir. This has been fascinating. Daniel, thank you. Keep doing the good work, and send my best to Wyoming, man.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
Yes, sir.
Cheers.
Take care. Cheers.